Good morning, everyone. This is the House Discrimination Prevention Panel. It is Friday, March 18th. We'll go around the room in the Zoom room to have folks introduce themselves. We have a little bit of committee business to do, not much. And then we're very honored to have some guests with us today who are going to give us a really wonderful presentation about disability etiquette. As the prevention panel and legislative operations and other areas of the legislature are working on accessibility issues. So this is a very important aspect for us. I'm going to start with committee business, and just a reminder to panel members, we have a hard stop at 20 minutes after 9 so that we can get to the floor. Representative Taylor Small is joining us now. I had a brief meeting with Speaker Krowinski yesterday, and she wanted to update us on a few things. One is that there is a witness document that was created by Social Equity Caucus and an affinity group to prepare witnesses for testifying in committee. So it's a more expansive preparation than what is we used to have. And so the committee chairs, Senate leadership, and staff have all been introduced to this witness document. They have the final template, and it is now being used. So if you have any questions, I would reach out to your leadership or your chair to see how that's going, and if you want to take a look at the document. And then as far as having further training on prevention of discrimination, as we had talked about, in addition to Damien's presentation earlier this year, the Speaker's office has reached out to NCSL, the National Council of State Legislators, to have help from them, to have some of their training. So that's being set up, and they are going to work on partly on a scenario-based model to address the kinds of questions that often come up when we have trainings about prevention of discrimination. And Mike Ferrant is officially now our point person, the legislative point person for all things accessibility. So if anyone has accessibility requests, Mike's the person to go to. Mike, please do have a seat. The Speaker's office has been working with the staff and joint Senate rules about issues like closed captioning. We all know the captioning's been a problem on Zoom. We can, and Mike has, and his team have done a great job when there is a need for ASL, to have live ASL, but there are other options for captioning that I asked Mike to talk to us about briefly.
Right. Mike Ferrant, Director of Legislative Operations. So we have researched additional captioning, or they're called CART services, C-A-R-T. I had the acronym, what it means, but I don't have it with me right now. And so there are some really interesting cost-effective options that we can enable, but they'd have to be by request. With the amount of committees that meet, it wouldn't be feasible to have these things turned on for every meeting all the time. So they would be by request. Kevin Moore and I are working on a request link for the main website as well as all committee websites. So if somebody needs those additional manual typing captioning services, they would just click the link, they would register for them. There is a 48-hour advance notice that we need to schedule those in. But then essentially it would be somebody else joining the Zoom meeting, typing what is being said word for word, and then those captions would appear the way that the AI captions do now, but it would be much more accurate. And so we would replace the automatic AI captions in Zoom meetings with those on demand. And I think it's important to note that that action means that we would stop automatically enabling the captions, and it would only be by request for those things. Now, the YouTube broadcast of our live streams always offers free captioning. It's not available for 24 to 72 hours after the meeting, but it is more accurate than the Zoom artificial intelligence. And so that's something some people don't know, that YouTube enables that for anything on their platform. So that would be available to people too.
Great, thank you, Mike. And if anyone had, since we're short on time this morning, if anyone had follow-up questions, who should they go to?
They can email me.
Okay.
They can email me or see me here. My email is mferrant@ledge.state.bt.us, and it's actually on the bottom of the agenda for this committee too.
Thank you so much, Mike.
You're welcome.
Just so you know, Chris Matos was trying to join via Zoom.
He is in the Zoom.
Oh. Mm-hmm. He doesn't think that he's in the Zoom.
Okay, I'll go double check.
No, I know you can't. I just.
That's Mike's life right now.
He was trying to be here.
He was.
Yeah.
No, he's not.
Where is Mike?
I'm here, Kelly.
Oh, you're there.
Where is Chris?
I'm here.
Chris,
I got to, I just need to run to committee in 5 minutes as we have crossover bills that we're trying to get out. So I've got to run to committee, and then if we get done, I'll come down.
All right, be sure to take a look at the presentation. And I think we should start now so we can make sure we get the benefit of a good presentation. So Heather and Nat, please take it away.
Thank you so much for having us here. I truly appreciate it. I think this was an outgrowth of a presentation I did to House Commerce, and I believe it was Representative Mulvaney Stanek that forwarded this along. So we are truly appreciative to be here. And yes, as we run, a lot of information will be exchanged, and Heather and I will put our emails in the chat as well for follow-up questions, etc. So Heather, thanks so much for doing this. Appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much for having us. And I wanted to be very clear that this is, an open discussion. And I also personally would like to say I learned a lot from Representative Small when she did a presentation to our group at HeyU a number of years ago. So really excited that you are in attendance as well. But really, there's a humongous amount of information in the PowerPoint. And I don't want to belabor the group, but I'd like to kind of hit the high points and just, really have a discussion about this. But wanted to, that we are certainly, Nat and I and, everyone at Higher Ability certainly is here to assist and help in any way we can. But it's, as with so many things, it's hard to feel like a full subject matter expert because things change all the time, and words are reclaimed and become power, and that previously were kind of off the table and recommended to never use. So it is an ongoing learning experience, and I just want to be very, very clear and upfront about that from the beginning. So I will go ahead and share my screen. We'll get started. Okay, so Higher Ability, this is our new Voc Rehab Vermont branding.
Heather, sorry, we're not able to see the presentation on your screen.
Sure what?
Oh, thank you.
Okay, it says that I'm sharing it.
And I can see it on my screen from here.
Yes, it's on our end. We're just changing the view.
Okay, perfect.
Great.
Content. Well, it's shared.
That one.
Gallery.
Push the, so when I did it, it went like that, like that. I don't know what that is. It didn't come up.
Oh, Heather Patel.
Should we have her take it down and put it back up?
In theory, it should be showing on the
Yeah,
screen.
it should be, and that's how I.
That's I'm wondering if
See if here.
I'm able to pull the presentation up on my computer, but I also recognize that you do not have an iPad or computer with you. So we'll get on the screen.
If you don't mind, I'll just sit next to you.
I would love for you to sit
Okay,
next to me.
we can go ahead.
Yeah,
We'll just pull it up on ours.
Okay, I can try to work on this.
Elizabeth, if you want to sit here, you can look at my screen. We're looking at a, what do you call it? Presentation PowerPoint. Thank you. More coffee, please.
And so are you looking at the presentation that was sent out, or are you looking at the live, what I'm showing?
What was sent out previous?
Okay, great. Just so I can let you know when to advance the slide. That's good.
Great.
The presentation is on YouTube, so.
Oh, great.
Okay.
It is on YouTube?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so disability etiquette. And it's just important to get into a little bit of background here. So more than 56.7 million Americans have a disability. And talking about the ADA, the Americans with Disability Act of 1990, the goal of integrating people with disabilities into all aspects of American life, especially the workplace. Businesses' sensitivity to folks with disabilities can, of course, help them expand their practice, better serve their customers, and develop an audience. And it helps patrons feel welcome, more comfortable, and work more productively. So again, I'll advance the slide. As we're starting out with this quote, the most important part of interacting with someone who has a disability is seeing that person for whom he, she, or they are, not as the disability the person has. And so again, common ground is the base of all human connections. And once you've found something in common, you can typically deal with the differences. So it's really important to think about not victimizing people with disabilities or assume that they see their disability as a tragedy. And I think we've seen this in cases of domestic violence where, the movement is to call the person a survivor and not a victim, because that brings power to the experience that they've been through. So similarly to that, we want to make sure that, most people with disabilities have worked through the tough emotions and are happy and content with their lives as they are. A seemingly harmless statement like, "I'm so sorry that that happened to you," referring to someone as a spinal cord injury victim, takes away that person's power. And it abdicates them of their strength and ability to overcome, because it emphasizes what happened to them as opposed to what they did about it. So again, referring to them as a survivor. And I also want to say that a lot of times, human nature, we are terrified of making mistakes, especially in this day and age, and things are recorded and you never know who's listening and what's happening. So a lot of times, instead of saying anything, people stand back because they're not sure how to interact. And so it really is something that becomes unintentionally disrespectful to the person with a disability, because the default is to ignore that person altogether with the fear of messing things up or doing something wrong. So it's important to overcome our own insecurities and not ignore the person with a disability, because they are human, and as with everything, their existence deserves acknowledgement. So I do have a video, and that is in the PowerPoint, but I'm not sure that it makes sense with you watching on the own screens to share it, but I would recommend watching it afterwards. It is really very straightforward and simple and kind of sets everyone at ease, but it is a nice short video, and just a good reminder is the next slide, the disability sensitivity training video. Would you all agree with that because you can't actually see it, or would it be helpful to hear the audio? What are you all feeling? I know we'd never all hit play at the exact same time.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving along to slide 10, the basics. And again, we'll start out. So
Heather, if I may just amplify, the other aspect of is inspiration porn.
Yes.
Where people greet you, oh, it's so remarkable. You learned how to walk again. Oh, it's so remarkable. Oh my God. And it's almost as bad that it's like, well, yeah, I'm walking in the room.
Yes.
So I think it's because that distances you as well. And then this morning, people should hear on VPR, Thomas Caswell did an extraordinary interview about he's on the autism spectrum, and in high school he realized he was gay. And so the complexity of that, and then being interviewed now as someone in his 20s about having a dating life, a love life, a sex life, was on VPR. It was fantastic. So it's about the person.
Yes, absolutely. It really, really is. Yes, and I think, often we've been shown images of, somebody who either was born without or who have lost their legs and they're, an Olympic swimmer and, things like that almost, takes away the power and the accomplishment of what they've done is one thing, but to make that your like, if they can do it, you can do it, motive is not appropriate. Yes, thank you for bringing that up. Ask before you help. So just because someone has a disability, don't assume that they need help. If the setting is accessible and people with disabilities can usually get around just fine. Adults with disabilities want to be treated as independent people. Offer assistance only if it appears the person needs it, and a person with the disability will often inform you or communicate what they need. So being sensitive about physical contact. So some people with disabilities depend on their arms for balance, and what seems very harmless or something that you think is assisting them, grabbing them, could unintentionally knock them off their balance. Also, avoid patting a person on the head or touching their wheelchair, scooter, or cane. People with disabilities consider their equipment part of their personal space. Always speak directly to a person with a disability and not just their companion, aid, or interpreter. Making small talk with a person who has a disability is fantastic. Just talk to them as you would anybody else. Respect their privacy. If you must ask about their disability, they may feel like you're treating them as a disability and not a human. However, many people with disabilities are comfortable with questions about their disability after getting to know somebody. Respond graciously to requests. So when people ask for accommodations, it is typically not intended to be a complaint. It shows that they feel comfortable enough with you and at your establishment to ask for what they need. And if they get positive feedback, that of course, they'll certainly share that and come back again and also, tell friends and family about the service that they received. So it's really positive all around. People with disabilities are the best judge of what they can or cannot do. It's important to not make decisions about them participating in any activity. Depending on the situation, it also could be a violation of the ADA to exclude somebody because of presumptions about limitations. Was there a question or?
So sorry, I was just congratulating our wonderful staff who has now put up the PowerPoint on the screen. So now we can see everything.
Oh, perfect. Okay, good to know. Okay. And people with disabilities are individuals with families, jobs, hobbies, likes and dislikes, problems and joys. While the disability is an integral part of who they are, it alone does not define them. So exactly what you were saying earlier, it's important to not make them into a disability hero or victim. You want to treat them as individuals. So moving ahead, some language tips. Put the put the person first. So for example, saying a person with Tourette's syndrome. Remember, individuals have their own preferences, and it's always important to ask if you're unsure. Again, never using outdated terms. And again, keeping in mind that this is ongoing and that terms can be taken back and hold a lot of power later on. So just because it's off the table now doesn't mean that it will forever be so. Being aware of that many people with disabilities dislike jargon and euphemistic terms like physically challenged or differently abled. And I think we're certainly coming out of a time that those words were popularized, and a lot of us were thought that, you know, utilizing them, we were being more inclusive, but we're not currently. So you want to say things like the person who uses a wheelchair rather than confined to a wheelchair or wheelchair bound. The wheelchair enables that person to get around and participate in society. So it's seen as a liberating tool, not a confining one. And it's okay to use expressions like good to see you to somebody who is blind, or see you later. Those expressions are acceptable and often utilized all the time. I know we have a coworker who is deaf and often says things about hearing us, and certainly makes some jokes about it as well. So again, it's okay. Don't feel like you've just, you know, something that you would say normally, you've just said and kind of stepped in it. And it's really important to know the people who you connect with or interact with most. So it's really, you know, again, getting to know those people just as you, again, this is human interaction, but it's just important to think about that. What people like and dislike. I like to pause and just say, in the same way that you could say you met somebody with brown hair, it means you've met one person with brown hair. It doesn't mean that everyone who has brown hair likes to be treated the same way. So it's just, it really is that simple when you get down to it. So at this stage, just getting a little bit more into specific disabilities and kind of the highlights of those. So please feel free to, you know, I'll pause and ask for questions at the end of each slide, but if you do have any, please feel free to ask or to put them in the chat. Nat's watching that. So people who use wheelchairs or who have mobility impairments. As with everything, feels sometimes like a broken record saying this, but there's people who use wheelchairs have varying abilities and different disabilities. So some people can use their arms and hands, while others can even get out of their wheelchair and even walk for short distances. So keeping in mind that a wheelchair is part of their personal space. And if you help someone down a curb without waiting for instructions, you may accidentally dump them out of their chair or detach the chair's parts if you lift it up by the handles or footrest. So it's always important to wait for clear instruction. Keeping ramps and wheelchair accessible doors to the building unlocked and unblocked. Be aware of somebody's reach limits and placing items to make sure that there's a clear path of travel to shelves and display racks. And when talking to a person in a wheelchair, it's, you know, would be nice to grab your own chair so you can sit at their level if possible. If that isn't possible, standing at a distance so that they don't have to strain their neck to make eye contact with you is really important. And then again, thinking about things like a counter, like a service counter, or, you know, a desk, and seeing whether or not there's ability to make adjustments to that to provide, you know, to allow for access and inclusion. It's also great, you know, having a clipboard on hand that can be passed around, and it doesn't matter what height it is. Or if there's, you know, anything where signatures are expected, you know, kind of thinking about all of those daily activities that we have and where where heights of those things are. And another point is if your building has different routes through it, being sure that signs direct people to the accessible routes around the facility. So people who use canes or crutches also need to know the easiest way to get around, and stairs may be easier for them, or a ramp, but ensuring that staff or security guards, receptionists, etc., can answer questions about the most accessible way around the building and grounds. Any questions here?
Well, this is Representative Palakia. I think for Mike, I think we have to also be aware that when the State House is open on Saturdays, we've been told that often the access doors are locked because of staffing issues. And I think the State House is open Saturdays, June through October. So I think we just have to educate our staff, make sure that those doors remain open.
Okay, I'll
Yeah.
I've got a question for Mike. What's and this is for, you can answer another time, but what is the emergency plan for people who use assistive devices and work on the third floor or upper floors?
So Chief of Police Matt Romei, who coordinates evacuation plans for the building, has a detailed section of that plan for folks with mobility issues.
Okay.
He'd be better to give details about it, but I know in prior years when we've done those drills, he's incorporated those into.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, I know that that's something in working for the state that is really clear that there is, a lot of thought put into that when we're in the offices.
Heather, and your previous slide about people first, what is your experience now with the deaf community? Because it seems they are now claiming they are a deaf person versus a person who is deaf. So that's a shift, or what's your experience with that?
I've actually only worked with people while that's been an empowering term, and it's important to delineate deaf with a capital D and deaf with a lowercase d. So I will get into it just shortly in that, but it is, yes, it very much is an empowering term currently. So yes, it's a great example of how, things change. Okay. So people who are blind or visually impaired. So typically, people who are blind know how to orient themselves and get around on the street. They are competent to travel unassisted, though may use a cane or a guide dog. A person may have a visual disability that is not obvious, so being prepared to offer assistance, for example, reading when asked, is important. So first off, you want to identify yourself before making any physical contact. Again, sometimes I feel like saying things that feels very, of course it would be, but you just need to say it to really make sure. So you want to tell them your name and your role, if that's appropriate, and be sure to introduce them to others who are in your group so that they're not excluded. If this is somebody who is new to your location, it's always really nice to offer a tour of your facility if they haven't been there before. Or if you've changed things around since they've been there last time, if you've, moved anything, rearranged, it's important because they typically are making a mental map of places in their mind. And so have that kind of muscle memory. I think a great example for those who are able to see things visually, that, you get so used to where a button is on a certain software that you use, and an update happens and that button moves, and that little change makes all the difference because of that muscle memory of always going to that place in your screen. So thinking about that in the actual space too is very, very similar. I'm sure we've all stubbed toes on rocking chairs and things like that if they're moved just a little bit. So making sure while you're offering your arm for guidance, and giving specific non-visual information when identifying obstacles or potential hazards. So rather than saying, go to your right when you reach the end of the office supplies, that assumes the person knows where the office supplies are. So saying something as walk forward to the end of this aisle and then make a full right is much more helpful. And if you need to leave somebody who is blind, inform them that you are leaving and ask if they need anything before you leave. People who are blind may need their arms for balance, so offering your arm is really important. And if they utilize a guide dog, you want to walk on the side opposite of the dog. And as you're walking, it can be really nice. Again, not everyone likes this all the time, but it can be really nice to describe the setting. And again, noting, of course, any obstacles such as stairs, if they're up or down, cracks in the sidewalk, or other hazards like revolving doors or half open doors, objects protruding from the wall at head level, especially, plants or hanging plants or lamps. And it's really important if there is need to have a warning, shout out a warning, to, hollering, look out, doesn't tell that person if they should stop, run, duck, jump. So it is really important to give specific warnings if there is. And of course, guide dogs and canes are, part of their individual space. So it's important not to touch them. And of course, a lot of times guide dogs have that notification on there that they are indeed working and, maybe at a different time are available to be pet. It's great to offer to read written information, such as the menu, or again, anything that doesn't have Braille on it. And utilizing for somebody who is visually impaired, making the font bigger on something. And again, so easy with technology that's been around for quite some time, but photocopying something, you can just really easily increase the font prior to making a photocopy. So asking what size is best for them and then getting those accommodations is great. And then you just want to make sure that you're checking in about how the lighting is. Sometimes it's really helpful to have a very well lit environment. Other times it's great if it's a little bit dimmer. So again, seeing what the person's preference is and orienting them when you set something down in front of them, utilizing the clock. So 12 o'clock being the furthest away from them, 6 o'clock being closest to them. So you can say, there's a pencil here at 9 o'clock and I've put your water at 2 o'clock, things like that, making sure that they kind of know visually where things are in their mind map. Any questions here? Okay. And briefly touched on it, but somebody with low vision, just seeing what font size works for them prior to printing materials. A lot of this has to do with prep before meetings and then again, if you have somebody who you continue to interact with, just making sure that you're able to kind of have a list for yourself so you can note things and then you're not always asking them the same questions and the same needs for accommodation. So it's really important to use a clear font with appropriate spacing because that's just important as type size. And it's okay to use a word in a sentence, typically that's all caps lock, but doing an entire sentence in caps lock is really difficult, and entire paragraphs in caps lock are almost impossible for people with low vision to determine where sentences end and begin. They rely on that, a sentence starts with a capital letter and then moves in. Italics are also challenging, and sometimes things bold and underlined can be difficult. it is also a really helpful tool for some people as well. So again, asking what works best for people and not overutilizing it. So again, not underlining an entire paragraph or not bolding an entire paragraph, to use it sparingly if it's needed to call out important sections. Labels and signs should be clearly lettered and in contrasting colors. So it's really, easiest for most people with low vision to read bold white letters on a black background. But again, keeping that in mind. And of course, like we talked about, keeping walkways clear of obstructions, and good lighting is important, but it shouldn't be too bright. And very shiny paper or very shiny walls can create a glare and actually disturb people's eyes. Any questions here?
No questions on my end, Madam Chair, if I may. I just want to recognize our time constraints.
Yes, 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Again, there is so much information in this PowerPoint, so you really do have the tools available, and Nat and I are also available.
Heather, do you do like website audits, especially with this, what we're talking about? And our website is pretty inaccessible. And if all the documents are supposed to be public.
I personally do not. I am learning about accessibility in documents, but we don't, again, that is a humongous question for all of us, that, kind of figuring out those types of resources and making things accessible when that's in our power. So yeah, we don't offer those services specifically.
Heather, a couple of questions.
Yeah.
One is, do we have permission to share this presentation with the legislature and staff? That's my first question.
Absolutely. Yeah.
We'll run it through the speaker's office to be sure, but I think it would be helpful for all of us to have access to it.
It's also posted to the panel's website.
And Mike just said it's also posted to the panel's website, so that's even better if it will have a hyperlink to it.
And I would share the PowerPoint version of it, just because that in the notes section, and when you were looking at it on your screens, you might have noticed that's where I really have the meat of it. I didn't, again, I don't want to overwhelm the slides with information, but there's a huge amount in the notes section of each slide.
Notice that, yeah.
Yeah, and then I also, within that, at the end, I had included a lot of videos, a lot of TED Talk videos about various people with disabilities explaining their experiences, and those are incredibly important. And I also included a list of references. And the first link, the unitedspinal.org disability etiquette, has a huge amount of information on it as well.
Would it be possible for you to send us a document with those links on it, and then we could post those to our website?
Absolutely, yes, for sure.
Thank you. And the last thing is Chair's prerogative. I also want to tell you that Hannah and Aria say hello. They were thrilled that you were presenting this morning.
Ah, that's so sweet. Thank you. I say hello back as well.
So did you have, thinking about the presentation, were there any other points that you wanted to, while we're together before we end in 5 to 10 minutes? Anything you wanted to be sure to touch on?
Go ahead.
Go ahead now.
Sorry.
Yeah, please do.
We're in statute, we are the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, so we're part of the workforce development system here in Vermont. We're in the middle of a rebrand to higher ability. It better reflects where we are as a division, and it also better reflects where we're going in terms of helping individuals with disabilities explore, gather information, connect to the labor market, and ultimately competitive employment. That's our number one goal for workforce development. What we have found, and what Heather has been, I'm going to not embarrass her too much, but this tool has been very helpful because we have questions from our business customers. Understandably, we have a dual customer model, the individual that is receiving services from our division, and the business customer. One doesn't happen without the other in our world. The business customers have understandable questions and in some cases misperceptions or long-held notions. And these types of presentations, along with we have a group of business account managers out in the field who intersect with the business community, we consider ourselves not only workforce development, but also an opportunity to help inform and educate and answer questions and assist the business customer so that they can understand that when you're hiring an individual with disability, what you're actually hiring is a Vermonter that wants to go to work and has skills and can contribute to your business. And the fact that the individual has a disability or is managing some aspect of disability, that is manageable. It can be managed. It happens every day in our world. So we are strength-based, skills-based, and it's an opportunity for us to educate. I wanted to make sure we got that on your radar as well.
Thank you, Nat. And as you're here with us, a government entity, and the legislature and staff are in multiple places leaning in much harder on addressing accessibility issues. I'm wondering if you also provide presentations and assistance to other government agencies.
We have, and we will gladly present to any agency that would like us to present. I mean, that's not a problem. Today's world, presenting is easier than ever. And so I'm actually going to volunteer Heather now. But Heather and I would love to do this. Heather does the lift and I just get to be part of the guys that schedule it. But yeah, we would gladly do it, of course. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I did want to,
go ahead, Heather.
Because there were a few questions about the deaf community, and of course you talked earlier on about captioning and sign language interpreters, would it be helpful to end on that slide, or do you feel comfortable, or are there more questions prior to getting there?
Let's see if there are more questions, and if not, we'll end on that.
Okay.
Anyone here have any more questions? Sarah? All right, let's end on the deaf slides.
Okay, perfect. So something that I didn't realize initially, but American Sign Language is an entirely different language from English, with a syntax all of its own, and lip reading is difficult for people who are deaf with a capital D if their first language is American Sign Language. And that's because the majority of sounds in English are formed inside the mouth, and it's hard to speech read a second language. People who have hearing loss, however, communicate in English and typically use amplification devices, and seeing a speaker's lips can help them communicate and understand more effectively. So there's, as with everything, a big range of communication preferences and styles among people with hearing loss that, certainly deep to go into, but it's helpful to note that the majority of people who incur hearing loss as an adult do not communicate with sign language. And people who experience it at an earlier age are the people who typically identify with being deaf with a capital D, because that is part of their identity and their youth and growing up. And it's really fantastic cochlear implants and sign language interpreters, as well as CART services and something like this, and even AI in a pinch. The AI captioning is better than nothing. So making sure to follow a person's cues as to what they prefer, sign language, gesturing, writing, or speaking. And if you have trouble understanding the speech of a person who is deaf or hard of hearing, let them know. That's really appreciated, because it doesn't just kind of allow them to think that they're being understood and when they're not. So for complex information, it's really important if the person prefers to utilize an interpreter or a live person doing closed captioning to honor those requests as you're able. are certainly staff who we have who would prefer everything to have closed captioning. But again, as was originally referenced, it does take a little bit of time to get that scheduled. And there are also limited resources because it is an actual person doing it. So prioritizing those meetings that have really complex information that is incredibly important to get across. So for instance, a doctor's appointment or a job interview, those are really important to have somebody there. Looking directly at the person who is deaf and maintaining eye contact. I think this is, one of those things, if you had, kind of rules and etiquette drilled into you at any stage, but you typically look who's talking, and it's really hard to train your brain that that's the interpreter talking for the person who is deaf. And so not looking at the interpreter and shifting your focus to look at the person that is deaf, it can be really challenging to train your mind to do that. But that's important because it is indeed the deaf person who is speaking and communicating. To get before speaking to somebody who is deaf or who has hearing loss, it's important to get their attention. So depending on the situation, you can extend your arm, wave your hand, tap them on the shoulder, or flick the lights. And it's important to rephrase rather than repeat sentences when the person doesn't understand. So utilizing a quiet area, and I realize it's 9:20, so we'll just go, again, be aware of lighting and other sounds, and speak clearly, don't shout. Okay.
Thank you so much, Heather.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Nat.
Thanks so much for having us.
I'm sure we'll be seeing you again, and I'm grateful for it. Have a good rest of your day.
Have a great day.
Thanks, y'all.